It began with a painting, an oil canvas hanging above the fireplace of a long-abandoned estate that no one had claimed in over 80 years. Its subject a woman whose eyes seemed to follow Daniel wherever he stood. Daniel, a 30-year-old restoration artist weary of the modern world and endlessly drawn to the past, had come to the village of Marrow Hollow seeking solitude and purpose after the sudden death of his mother, only to find himself obsessed with the mysterious woman in the portrait. Her face both unfamiliar and heartbreakingly familiar. Villagers spoke of her in hushed tones, calling her the Bride of the Mist. A woman who vanished in 1942, the night before her wedding, leaving behind only this portrait, a sealed diary with no key, and a house full of untouched belongings that hadn't aged a day. As Daniel restored the furniture and walls, strange things began to happen, whispers in the hallways, the scent of jasmine lingering where no flowers grew, and shadows moving through mirrors when no one was there. One evening while cleaning the attic, he discovered an old phonograph that, when played, conjured a female voice singing a song that echoed faintly in his dreams. He began painting her unconsciously, finding her face again and again in his work, until one night, in a moment of sleepless desperation, he called out to her, and the mirror across the room rippled like water, revealing the woman, not as a ghost but as real as he was, stepping into his world. With eyes that shimmered with centuries of sorrow. Her name was Evangeline, and she was neither alive nor dead, but trapped between moments in time, cursed by a lover who had made a deal with something ancient to keep her his forever. She had been waiting for the one who could break the loop, someone who remembered her, not in mind but in soul, and Daniel, without knowing why, began to recall dreams of another life, another century, where he had held her hand as they ran from fire and war. As their connection grew, so did the disturbances in the house. Footsteps in the snow that led nowhere, windows that revealed landscapes from another century, and clocks that ticked backward. The village began to notice Daniel's strange behavior, whispering that the estate was cursed, that no one should live there past the seventh night. But Daniel could not leave, not when every minute with Evangeline felt like a lifetime rediscovered. They spent hours talking in the attic, the only room where time felt still, where she told him of the life she once lived in the 1800s, of her love for a man who looked exactly like him, and of the betrayal that led her to this purgatory of mirrors and music. Daniel became determined to save her, believing that if he could uncover the truth of her curse, he could restore her to life or cross into her world to stay by her side forever. Their bond grew stronger with each passing night, and though the house continued to groan with the weight of broken time, Daniel never wavered. On the sixth night, they found an old journal hidden behind a false wall in the library, its pages filled with frantic Latin script and sketches of stars and symbols Daniel felt he had drawn before, though he could not explain how. It spoke of a mirror that showed truth, a locket that bound the soul, and a name, Lucien Delacroix, a nobleman who had once courted Evangeline and who had vanished the same day she did. His portrait scratched from all village records. Daniel recognized that name from one of his dreams, a dream where he'd been chased through a burning forest by a man with silver eyes whispering that love always returns to its maker. The journal hinted that the only way to break the curse was to face Lucien within the mirror world, and willingly give up the memory of the one you love most. And though the idea of forgetting Evangeline tore at Daniel's soul, he knew that true love did not cling. It sacrificed. And so he continued his search for the mirror world entrance mentioned in the journal, tracing symbols across the house's shifting architecture as reality began to bend under the weight of their growing connection. Windows now showed other lives. Flashes of Evangeline dancing under gas lamps, crying in a marble crypt, laughing in a carriage beside someone who wore Daniel's face. Time was folding, collapsing in on itself, and each moment they spent together came with the cost of another memory. Unraveling from Daniel's mind, he began forgetting simple things, like his favorite color or his mother's voice, and Evangeline begged him to stop before he lost himself entirely, but he smiled through the ache and whispered, "You're the only memory I need." On the seventh night, the house went silent, too silent, as though it were holding its breath, and the air turned thick and humming with unseen electricity. Evangeline led him to the ballroom, a place he had never dared enter before, where the Chandelier was shattered on the floor and the walls bore claw marks made of frost. In the center stood a single mirror, tall and thin, framed in twisted silver that shimmered like liquid under the moonlight pouring through broken stained glass. The mirror pulsed, a heart of glass, and when Daniel touched it, the world inverted. Suddenly he was standing in the same ballroom, but it was whole and glowing, full of guests in 19th century attire who moved in slow, eerie repetition, their faces blurred, their laughter echoing like it came from underwater. Evangeline stood beside him, now fully corporeal, dressed in her wedding gown, her eyes filled with fear and hope as she gripped his hand and whispered, "You mustn't believe what you see." Lucien appeared then. As regal as a fallen angel, his eyes silver, his voice like honey wrapped around knives, telling Daniel that Evangeline had once belonged to him, that Daniel had stolen her across lifetimes, and that this mirror realm was his creation, a prison made of longing and illusion. Lucien offered Daniel a deal. Walk away now, forget everything, and he would let Evangeline fade peacefully instead of suffering the slow, cruel unraveling of her soul across shattered time. But Daniel refused, knowing that love wasn't love if it ended when things got difficult. Lucien, furious, summoned the Grey. A swarm of memories turned against them, scenes of Evangeline crying as Daniel died in dozens of different ways across alternate lives, stabbed by knights, drowned in ships, aged alone while she watched helplessly. The agony crushed him, tore at his chest, made his hands tremble, but Evangeline sang the tune from the phonograph, and her voice became his anchor. Together they turned the mirror on Lucien, revealing not a man but a frightened, forgotten soul who had made a desperate pact with an ancient entity to stop time and keep her his forever, only to become its prisoner himself. Lucien screamed as his reflection shattered, pulling him back into the void, and as the ballroom cracked apart, the ground split, and the guests dissolved into ash, Daniel and Evangeline ran. Not through doors but through memories, past the day they first kissed, the time she had whispered "I love you" in a cathedral that no longer existed, and the night she vanished before his eyes in a war they never survived. The farther they ran, the brighter her form became, until she began to shimmer like sunlight breaking through morning fog. They reached the attic, and there, in the heart of the mirror world, Daniel found the obsidian locket buried beneath floorboards that hadn't been there before. It burned cold in his palm, humming with ancient power, and Evangeline told him that to destroy it was to break the curse, but that it could also sever them forever if done without faith. And Daniel, with trembling hands, stared at the locket and then at Evangeline, who stood bathed in flickering candlelight, not begging him to choose her, not pleading for mercy, but simply waiting with the dignity of someone who had already lost everything and had made peace with it if it meant the one she loved might be free. The silence between them pulsed louder than words, and Daniel realized that real love wasn't about holding on, it was about choosing again and again, even when the future was uncertain, even when the past threatened to rewrite itself. He lifted the locket to his lips, whispered her name, and it cracked in his hand with a thunderous snap that sent waves of light through the attic, shattering the false world around them. The house screamed as reality surged back into place, rooms folding and refolding, photographs unburning themselves on the walls, timelines merging like rivers meeting in a storm. Daniel fell, or floated, he couldn't tell, into darkness, but before it consumed him, he felt her kiss on his forehead and heard her say, "You found me in every life, and I will find you in the next." He awoke in a hospital bed in London 2 days later, surrounded by machines and nurses who told him he'd been unconscious after a beam collapsed during a restoration job at Thornvale Estate. But the official records stated the building had been sealed for decades, and the village of Marrow Hollow no longer existed on any map. Confused and aching, he tried to remember why Jasmine made his chest tighten and why he kept dreaming of a ballroom with mirrors that breathed, discharged with a clean bill of health but a mind full of broken images. Daniel wandered the city like a man chasing a tune he couldn't name, until one afternoon, he stepped into a quiet gallery tucked between antique bookstores. And there it was, her portrait, perfectly restored, hung in the center of the room with a plaque beneath it reading, "Evangeline, the Bride of the Mist, artist unknown, restored 2025 by Daniel Ashcroft." He didn't remember doing the work And yet he remembered every brushstroke. A woman with honey-brown hair passed him in the gallery and paused, her eyes catching his as if they'd locked before in a moment lost to time. And when he asked her name, she smiled and said, "Eva." They met for coffee. And one meeting turned into many, and though they danced around the truth, he couldn't deny the way her laugh curled around his bones like a melody he'd heard in his sleep. She didn't remember either, not clearly, but they both agreed the dreams were strange, beautiful, and haunting, always filled with fog, mirrors, and each other. Daniel tried to move on, but the past clung like a shadow. He returned to the manor one final time and found the attic boarded up. Except for one dusty phonograph with a single record resting on top, the label read forever and any time. When he played it, the room fell silent except for the soft voice singing the tune Evangeline once hummed, and a sudden breeze swept through, carrying with it the unmistakable scent of jasmine and something older, something eternal. Daniel turned, expecting nothing, hoping for everything, and saw her, not as a ghost or memory, but as Eva, standing at the door, tearfully whispering, "I remember." Their embrace felt like a universe healing, like every broken lifetime stitching together into one where they had found each other again. But peace was not theirs yet, for the locket's curse, while broken, had released something else, something older than Lucian. Something that had waited for centuries for a soul pure enough to open the final door. Daniel's love had not only undone the curse but had awoken an ancient keeper bound to the Thornvale estate, and now strange messages began to appear on mirrors. Clocks stopped at the exact minute he kissed her in the attic, and both he and Eva began to experience flashes, not memories but warnings. And those warnings came as dreams, first Eva waking in a cold sweat from visions of fire engulfing the Thornvale estate, of Daniel standing before a mirror that showed not his reflection, but 1,000 versions of himself, each dying differently, each whispering, she must not forget again. The more they tried to live a normal life, the more the veil between worlds thinned. And soon Daniel began hearing music with no source, feeling drops of rain indoors and glimpsing Evangeline's older self in reflections when Eva stood beside him. She, too, began to feel displaced, recalling languages she never learned, dates she shouldn't know, and songs she could hum note for note even though she didn't remember the lyrics. One night, the mirror in their flat cracked from the inside out, and etched across it were the words, "The Keeper is awake." Through research that took them from secret corners of the British Museum to half-burned records in hidden libraries, they discovered an old order, the Custodes Temporis, guardians of memory and time, who had once been tasked with preventing curses like Lucian's from taking root. Thornvale, they realized, had been one of many anchor sites where breaches between past and present occurred, and Evangeline's curse had held something in check. Now that it was broken, something older, more dangerous, was free, and it wanted Eva. Not as a victim, but as a vessel to rewrite time itself, to stitch together a world where no love ever faded, no time ever passed, but where freedom, truth, and individuality would dissolve into perfect stillness. Daniel and Eva were given a choice by the Keeper, who appeared as a mirror image of Daniel with black eyes and a voice made of thunder. Let Eva ascend and become the eternal keeper of still time, or watch history collapse in waves, erasing every version of their love, every life where they found each other. Daniel begged the universe for another path and found it hidden in the old phonograph in a code beneath the vinyl grooves. Coordinates that led them to a cave on the Scottish coast, where tides moved in reverse and stars blinked in patterns he remembered painting. There at the cave's heart was a stone altar and a mural of a couple who looked like them, etched 1,000 years before their time. The inscription read, "Only love that chooses to let go can unmake what never should have been." Eva realized the truth then. She had to return the love Daniel gave her, not with possession but with trust, and she stepped onto the altar and placed her hand on the ancient crystal embedded there, whispering, "If we're meant to love again, let it be by choice, not fate." Light engulfed her, the cave shook, and Daniel screamed her name. But she smiled at him with tears in her eyes and vanished into the shimmer of time. And then silence. Weeks passed and Daniel wandered empty days, hollow, afraid to sleep because sleep brought dreams of holding her hand and waking to find it gone. Until one spring afternoon in a New City in a bookstore tucked between alleys no GPS could find. He picked up a novel, The Woman in the Painting, and froze because the author's name was Eva Marlowe, and on the first page was a dedication. For the man who found me in every lifetime. He looked up and across the room stood a woman with honey-brown eyes and jasmine perfume who asked, "Have we met?" And Daniel, smiling through the tears that filled his soul, said, "Yes, many times, and I'd like to meet you again." And so they began once more. Not with fireworks or fate but with choice, a slow unfolding of a love unshackled by time, one built not on curses or magic, but the quiet, powerful belief that some souls are written into the seams of the universe, and though they may lose each other again and again, they will always, always find their way back, because love, real love, is not a moment. It is a memory that refuses to die.